Miho's limbs suddenly go rogue as he tries to break free, only to be sucked up onto the ceiling. As the monster closes in, Miho can do nothing but hold his breath, praying to stay unnoticed. Turns out, Miho is trapped in a lab, undergoing a simulation test. Whenever his brain is stimulated, it secretes a serum, which just so happens to be the antidote for a deadly virus. After the serum is injected, a virus-infected girl shows significant improvement, but relapses a few days later, turning into a full-blown zombie. In pursuit of a purer antidote, immunes are to be transported to the last remaining city on Earth. Meanwhile, Miho's companions mount a rescue operation, but trying to stop a speeding train is no easy task. Enter Thomas, scaling the roof, while Vince takes the wheel. Once the car is secured, Thomas leaps onto the train, but then the car's front tire blows, nearly killing Vince. With the hook in front barely holding on, Vince makes a daring leap and manages to grab onto the train. Yet, the crisis is far from over, as an armed plane appears behind them. Thankfully, in the nick of time, Brenda and her father manage to divert the plane, allowing Thomas and company to climb atop the train. Hardly 2 steps forward, they're blocked by soldiers ahead. In a critical moment, Vince decides to detonate a bomb, detaching the rear carriages from the train. Once the compartment where the immunized person was located was identified, several people began to divide up the work and prepare to cut the compartment open, but the situation with Brenda looks grim. Their vehicle forced to a halt at the base of a mountain, with soldiers intending to capture them alive. Unfazed by the dire situation, Brenda and her father had already set a trap. Working in tandem with their teammates lying in ambush, they easily take down the plane. Then, Jorge uses the plane's hook to hoist the entire carriage off the ground, leaving the soldiers to only watch as they make their escape. However, upon opening the carriage, they find that Miho is not inside, only Eris and other immunes, leaving Thomas somewhat disheartened. Once the abandoned cruise ship at the port is repaired, Vince plans to take everyone away from here, in search of a new home. But for Thomas, Miho, who has been through life and death with him, is more important than anyone else. Eris tells Thomas that the people at Viken often refer to a city, but after the zombie virus outbreak, where in the world is there a city? Jorge claims he has been there before, to a bustling city known as the Last City. Thomas wants to follow the railway tracks to rescue Miho. Vince says he too wishes to save Miho, but he cannot risk more lives for one person. Just then, a roaring noise comes through the radio, prompting Jorge to quickly shut off the power. Going outside, they discover that WCKD is on their trail. Understanding that they can't stay put, Thomas reluctantly agrees to Vince's plan to evacuate, but after everyone else has fallen asleep, Thomas decides to go and rescue Miho on his own. Unexpectedly, Newt and Fry have been waiting for a while, and the three of them embark on the adventure to save Miho together. Following directions on the map, they soon arrive at a tunnel, knowing well that zombies lurk inside, yet it remains the only path to the Last City. They bravely enter the tunnel. Not far in, a zombie blocks their path. Soon after, a horde surrounds their vehicle. Seeing no other option, Fry floors the gas, causing chaos in the tunnel. In the panic, their vehicle crashes into an obstacle and flips over. Miraculously, all three escape serious injury. They fight off zombies while running towards the exit. Trapped between hordes and running out of ammo, their situation becomes desperate until Brenda and her father arrive just in time to save them. Before long, they lay eyes on the fabled Last City. Skyscrapers rise within, while ruins lay beyond its walls. Blending into the crowd, Thomas and his group look for a way into the city. Then, the mark on Thomas's neck exposes their location. Upon receiving this information, Jansen immediately activates the city wall's weapons, initiating a frenzied attack on the crowd. While fleeing, Thomas and his friends are suddenly taken by the local resistance. They are led through the impoverished districts to a hidden base. To their astonishment, the resistance's leader turns out to be Gally. Gally reveals that after they left the maze, the resistance saved him. This man, unrecognizable from before, stands as the leader of the resistance, barely surviving on the serum. Hearing that they wanted to break into the city, the man said he could give them a ride into the city. In return, once the deed was done, they were to bring him back some serum as a reward. The two struck a deal, and Gally led them through the underground tunnels, successfully sneaking into the city. However, getting past the city wall was just the first hurdle. The real challenge was how to approach the lab. Taking advantage of the curfew, the group quietly climbed to the top of the city wall, then used binoculars to observe the lab. Thomas saw that the woman in the office was Teresa, who who had once betrayed them. Gally told Thomas that to infiltrate the lab, they would need to start with Teresa. Thomas, harboring old feelings, was reluctant to harm Teresa, much to Newt's dissatisfaction. Just then, his hand began to hurt. Thomas realized something was wrong, and discovered that Newt had been infected with the virus. On Teresa's end, the vaccine research was not making progress, and Ava began to despair. With the zombie virus spreading through the air, it wouldn't be long before the people in the city were infected. At that point, humanity would be doomed. As Teresa was leaving work for home, Thomas deliberately caught her attention, then lured her to the underground garage and took her back to the Resistance's base. From Teresa, they learned that the lab was holding 28 immune children, in addition to Miho, but Teresa told Thomas that once they approached the lab, the marks on their necks would be recognized. Thomas had her help remove the marks. Then, disguised as lab guards, they successfully infiltrated the building. Together with a hacker, they breached the building's security system. After taking out a few guards, they successfully rescued the 28 immunes. Gally was responsible for leading the children out, while the three of them went to rescue Miho. However, they were stopped at the door by Jansen. At a critical moment, Teresa pushed the two into a room and locked the door, buying them enough time. She then took a cloth stained with Thomas's blood to a lab. After testing the serum, it was discovered that Thomas's blood was the cure they had been desperately seeking. Thomas managed to rescue Miho, but with no resources left, the three had to lock themselves in a room. The door was about to be cut open, leaving them little time. The two decided to smash the glass with an oxygen tube. As the door was opened, the three jumped into the water pool at the bottom of the building. Looking upstairs at a resigned Jansen, Thomas raised his middle finger in triumph, but as soon as he came ashore, he was surrounded by guards again. Fortunately, Gally intervened in time to save them. Brenda led the group of children onto a bus. They planned to wait for everyone to regroup, but were discovered by the guards. Brenda had no choice but to drive the bus away with the children. After a heart-pounding chase, they were sandwiched by soldiers. Brenda stepped in front of the bus and fired a flare. Seeing the signal, Fry used the crane on the city wall to hook the bus's safety bar. Fry quickly flipped the switch, and the bus was instantly pulled up. But due to the heavy weight of the bus, the safety bar was about to break. Fortunately, Fry reacted in time, successfully lifting the bus over the wall as the rope broke. When they returned to the Resistance base, they found it deserted. The Resistance leader was rallying all the residents outside the wall, preparing to launch a final assault on the last bastion. After a speech, the leader drove a car filled with gasoline straight toward the city wall. He wanted to fight for the civilians outside the wall. The wall was blown open, and all the refugees poured into the city, clashing with the soldiers. Under heavy artillery fire, the city was plunged into chaos. Meanwhile, Vince and Jorge arrived in a plane to pick them up. As everyone prepared to evacuate, Newt's condition worsened, and he was quickly turning into a zombie. The only solution was to return to the lab for the serum. Thomas stayed behind to take care of Newt. Then, Teresa's voice came over the radio. She told Thomas that the lab's serum had a very short effect, and only Thomas's own serum had a chance to save Newt. Brenda was the best proof, but it was too late. Newt had lost his sanity and began to attack Thomas wildly. In the end, Newt, with his last bit of humanity, ended his own life. Thomas, looking at the dead Newt, felt his anger explode. He picked up a pistol from the ground and rushed back to the lab, only to find Ava waiting for him in the hall. Ava knew that Thomas was the only one who could save the world. This time, she didn't force Thomas to make a choice. Instead, she allowed him to decide for himself. But then a gunshot rang out, and Ava died by Jansen's hand. Thomas was also injected with an anesthetic. When he woke up again, he found Jansen threatening Teresa to tweak the serum. It turned out Jansen's goal was to control the antidote and thus rule the entire city. Moreover, he himself was infected with the virus and was about to inject himself with the antidote, but Teresa knocked him down. Teresa quickly untied Thomas, but Jansen soon woke up again. During the struggle for the antidote, Thomas nearly lost his life. Then, a shell hit the building, flipping Jansen to the ground, and the two took the chance to flee. To cover for Teresa, Thomas unfortunately got shot. Seeing no way out, Teresa picked up the serum to divert Jansen's attention. Thomas picked up a tool and threw it directly at Jansen, who thought Thomas had missed. However, the glass breaking behind him was actually Thomas's target. Jansen was ultimately bitten to death by zombies. Teresa supported Thomas up to the rooftop. At that moment, the rooftop was surrounded by fire, and nearby buildings were collapsing rapidly. Teresa handed the antidote to Thomas, and the two kissed amidst the flames. They were prepared to face death together, but unexpectedly, Jorge arrived in a plane. With Teresa's help, Thomas successfully boarded the plane, but Teresa disappeared into the sea of fire along with the collapsing building, redeeming herself for her past. In the film's finale, all the survivors settled on an isolated island. There were no zombie viruses here, no wars, only a simple and peaceful life. Those who had passed away would be forever remembered. It was their sacrifices that brought about this beautiful life today.